Putin is either confused, deliberately lying, or believes the Russian general staff's fairy tales. There could be many explanations, but the result is obvious. The worldview of the Russian dictator is increasingly out of touch with reality. He enthusiastically talks about captured cities that don't exist on the map, and about encirclements that no one sees except him. Lies of this magnitude even puzzle Russian propagandists, since Putin's fantasies can't withstand even the most basic scrutiny. A telling example is Pokrovsk. The Russian army has been storming it since 2024 and still hasn't taken it. For about as long, Russian TV has been reporting that the city has been captured. Why does the Kremlin leader resort to such implausible lies? Let's figure this out now. Let's start with the imaginary victories. At a press conference in Bishkek, Putin claimed that the Donetsk region is gradually coming under Russian control and that there are currently battles for Komsomolsk. After that, according to him, Russian troops are supposedly supposed to advance on Sloviansk and Kupiansk. But the problem is, there is no such place as Komsomolsk in the Donetsk region. It simply doesn't exist on the map or in our world. Maybe the dictator meant Komsomolska, but that's not right either. The settlement has been under Russian occupation since 2014.
There are active hostilities inside Komsomolsk, and a significant number of buildings have already been liberated by our troops, and the advance continues.
Let's move on. Besides the fighting in the Phantom City, Putin keeps insisting that Kupiansk is completely under Russian control and that Ukrainian armed forces units there have supposedly been eliminated. In reality, however, Ukraine's defense forces are conducting both defensive and search and strike operations there, according to the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces, Oleksandr Syrsky. Let me remind you that, according to reports from the head of the Russian General Staff, Gerasimov, the Russian Federation took Kupiansk back on November 20th. So, for 11 days now, the invaders have been storming a city that, according to the General Staff, they supposedly occupied long ago.
The scale of the Russian leadership's lies about the situation in Kupiansk is staggering. But the truth is that in the days following their statements, fewer than 40 Russian radio communication subscribers were detected in the city. On the approaches to Kupiansk, our units are holding certain lines and increasing fire on the enemy to block their supply routes. Oleksandr Syrsky, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, on Telegram.
Now, let's move on to Pokrovsk. According to Putin, the city that the Russian army has been trying to capture for almost a year is already, pay attention to the number, 70% taken. Where do these calculations come from? Probably from the same place as the lie about capturing Kupiansk. In the latest report, the Russian Ministry of Defense claimed that just in the past week, the Russian army cleared more than 6,500 buildings in Pokrovsk. That's a nice number, except for the small detail that there simply aren't that many buildings there. According to Serhiy Dobrak, head of the Pokrovsk City Military Administration, in August 2025, there were 2,659 buildings in the city. At the same time, more than 90% of them have been destroyed or damaged. So, in order to clear 6,500 houses, they would first have to build almost 4,000 more.
At the moment, Pokrovsk is holding a line. There are difficult logistical moments, the enemy's interfering, but no one is saying that everything is easy for us there because this is war. The enemy also creates certain situations and threats. But we're holding on and we'll do our best to hold Pokrovsk for as long as possible. Olaf Apostol, commander of the air assault forces of the Ukrainian armed forces, speaking live on the United News Telethon.
Putin can fantasize about victories in the Donetsk region all he wants, but these fantasies won't bring back to life the tens of thousands of Russians whom the command is sending into meat grinder assaults there. The colossal losses suffered by the aggressor's army are completely disproportionate to the pace of its advance, analysts conclude.
The pace of the Russian offensive on the battlefield increased after the summit in Alaska on August 15th. From August 15th to November 20th, Russian forces advanced an average of 9.3 square kilometers per day across the entire theater of operations. However, the pace of this advance remains limited. Russian forces could capture the remaining part of Donetsk region held by Ukraine by August 2027 if the pace of the offensive remains unchanged, from the report of the Institute for the Study of War.
So why does the Kremlin resort to such blatant lies? According to analysts, this is how the dictator tries to put pressure on Kyiv's Western partners. His logic's pretty primitive. The idea is, if the West can be convinced that Russia is close to victory, it will push Ukraine toward capitulation.
Russian state media are also trying to reinforce the Kremlin's efforts to create the impression that Russian troops will inevitably break through sections of the front in Ukraine, destroy Ukraine's most capable elite units, and generally reduce the combat effectiveness of the Ukrainian armed forces, and that Ukraine and the West, therefore, must immediately give in to Russia's demands before the situation for Ukraine gets worse. From the Institute for the Study of War report.
Is Putin actually succeeding in putting this kind of pressure on Ukraine's partners? It's hard to believe. The intelligence services of European countries and the United States are working quite effectively, and they have objective information about the situation on the front lines. On the other hand, the West simply has no reason to trust the Russian dictator. On the contrary, there are plenty of examples of lies and manipulation from Moscow. The partners have no intention of reducing military aid to Ukraine and plan to increase sanctions pressure on Russia. After all, Putin is not only trying to occupy as much Ukrainian territory as possible, but also to inflict maximum harm on Ukraine's civilian population. Just in the past week, the Russian Federation launched nearly 1,400 attack drones, 1,100 guided aerial bombs, and 66 missiles at Ukrainian cities. These figures were announced by the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky.
Russia continues to terrorize Ukrainians, trying to destroy their hopes and break their resilience. In response, the aggressor must face the maximum possible pressure, while support for the victim should only increase. Margit Tsakna, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Estonia, on the social network X.
And against the backdrop of these massive terrorist attacks on Ukrainian cities, Moscow cynically claims to be, I quote, ready to bring everything to a peaceful resolution. But Ukraine is not waiting for a decision from the Kremlin and continues to work on the peace plan proposed by Washington. A meeting between Ukrainian and American delegations took place in Florida, where they discussed how to bring about a truly just peace for Ukraine.
We are discussing the future of Ukraine, Ukraine's security, the prevention of further aggression, Ukraine's prosperity, and its recovery. And we thank the United States team for all their efforts and assistance to us. The U.S. hears us, supports us, and stands with us on the same side.
It's not just about ending the war. It's about ending the war in such a way that creates a mechanism and a path forward that will allow Ukrainians to be independent and sovereign. Not just to rebuild the country, but to enter an era of extraordinary economic progress.
Russia has no intention of stopping the war against Ukraine. Kiev's partners are convinced. There are no signs that Putin is ready to abandon his aggressive plans. And in this sense, an interesting question arises. What will be the consequences for the Federation if the Kremlin finally refuses a peaceful settlement? The cost of the dictator's obsession with war grows every day, and sooner or later Russia will have to pay for everything.